You're still here on The Square, and our conversation remains on Brics. Now joining us is Anthoni from Nieuwkerk, who is lecturer at Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Relations, Unisa. Now, Anthony is joining us from Pretoria, South Africa. Anthony, thank you so much for your patience, and it wasn't an easy wait, but of course it was a very insightful conversation with Professor Suklal. First, I want to find out from you what rebalancing the global order looks like, and whether or not you think that is what Brics is proposing.
Yeah, so good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed listening to Ambassador Suklal. He's a colleague, but also a friend. I think he gave us a masterclass in understanding the Brics dynamic. He really did well. My own view is that we cannot underestimate the importance of Brics this year. Its architecture, its role, and the kind of contribution it is going to make in reshaping global affairs. In fact, I think as we speak, the world is changing in front of our eyes. One of the big triggers is the war in Ukraine, the war between Russia and NATO that plays out in Ukraine. But also, before that, there were other triggers. The difficulties associated with globalization that creates rich, very rich, and very poor. And that kind of inequitable economic and trading system was not bound to survive forever. And so as the world is now changing in front of our eyes, and as global governance becomes disputed, and as multilateralism itself, as represented by the United Nations, shows the shortcomings and, in fact, the failures of the UN system to prevent this kind of war and conflict between significant blocs and important countries, the question now becomes, what role can the Global South play? And here is the creation of a platform that's about to expand quite significantly in representing the voice and the interests of members of the Global South, citizens, governments, and interests. And I think we really look forward to a very successful outcome of the summit, despite the problems associated with hosting it. I think we're bound to see significant benefits.
I see. What are the challenges do you think that Brics could encounter in its bid to reform the global order?
Yeah. Look, there are many challenges. We shouldn't, at the same time, as I say that Brics is going to give us new hope in creating a more just global order, we shouldn't underplay the power of Western hegemony to maintain and control what it has. I can't think of any country that is in a dominant position of power and influence and then voluntarily gives it up to somebody else. So we should expect, and we do see resistance from American-led alliance, not only in NATO, which is sort of the military alliance, but also economically as represented in the World Bank, the IMF, and other institutions and platforms such as the G7 and even the G20. So there's a real intense struggle behind the scenes for those who are non-aligned, and particularly emerging economies in the global south, many in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Kenya, and so on, to join the one or the other bloc cause. And the Americans are really pushing very hard together with the Europeans to get African voices on their side. And this is a problem, because if and of course it is happening on the diplomatic level, if African countries and members of the Global South resist this pull from the Americans and the Europeans, then the stick instead of the carrot comes out very quickly. And speaking as a South African, we know the game very well. We have a very good trading partnership or relationship, not only with the Europeans, but also the Americans. And the Americans are saying to us, and they probably say this to others as well, if you don't join the cause against Russia, we will then sanction you or rethink the trading relationship, which is why it is so important for Brics to expand and become the vehicle and the new development bank to offer alternatives for South Africans, Africans, and members of the global South.
Indeed.
Not to be forced, to make that choice.
And I was going to ask about the lagging interest of African countries, and you seem to have given us a window to why some, African countries could be behind in showing interest in Brics. But what do you suggest to Brics as to how to maneuver that?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. But I think the key lies in the theme of the BRICS summit in August, which is South Africa is championing the cause of a free trade agreement, a continental free trade agreement, to which I must now say all of the African member states or of the AU has signed up. There might be one exception, I can't recall, Morocco, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, I think that the bulk, the large majority of African countries are behind this project to improve trade amongst ourselves. And what South Africa, as the host of the BRICS summit, is now doing is saying to African brothers and sisters, we are going to negotiate and put the interests of Africans on the BRICS summit agenda. One of the very first items, amongst others, is indeed how to promote Africa's economic prosperity and recovery from global recession. And also how to improve a more equitable and just trading system that will benefit Africans as a continent. So South African diplomats like Ambassador Suklal and his colleagues do not have a mandate to speak as South Africans. They have a mandate to speak as Africans to colleagues and friends in the BRICS alliance to see how we can forge a stronger relationship to the benefit of those who have fallen behind in recent times. Because let me also be quite frank, in Africa we do experience large levels of instability, coups. The war in Sudan is really a worrying factor. Violent extremism and terrorism is not going away. And of course, the impact of Ukraine and food and energy security is significant. So as Africans, we also have to come to the BRICS table with a prepared position. And I think Ambassador Suklal and his colleagues are really challenged to find that common voice that will represent.
I see. And currency will be one of the things that BRICS would have to deal with as more and more members come to the table, as a bloc. You heard what Professor Suklal talked about. It would seem that it looks nice on paper, but in implementation, when every member of the bloc is now trading in their own currency, how feasible is this, and what would the solution be to the currency issue?
Yeah, I don't think this is going to happen overnight. I think Ambassador Suklal was very diplomatic in the way that he responded. The dollar and the euro dominate the global trading system, and African countries have little choice in following suit. We're far away, and I would even speculate and say that BRICS, even if it expands to include other important and influential countries in its fold, will have to spend a bit of time to develop their own currency in a regional trading system to counter the dominant position of the dollar and the euro. This is a long-term project. I think that'll evolve over a period of 5 to 10 years. We cannot avoid the dominance of the dollar in terms of global trade.
The other thing they would have to, battle with is, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or the Russia-Ukraine war, however you want to look at it. And like I told Professor Suklal, there was no mention in the joint statement. He says there were discussions on that. How much of an impact could Russia's involvement in Ukraine have on plans that BRICS has?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Again, the ambassador was diplomatic in his response. I wasn't at the meeting where he was, so I don't know what happened behind the scenes. But it's clear to me that the BRICS position is consolidated, which is BRICS members collectively and individually will do everything in their power to force the parties to the conflict, the Russians, the Europeans, the Americans, and the Ukrainians, to come to the peace table. I'm afraid to say that I don't foresee peace happening anytime soon, because it's a war of attrition. The Russians will not back off. The Americans and the Europeans will not leave Ukraine until Russia leaves. So we are set for a war of attrition with a terrible humanitarian toll, by the way. Lots of suffering that will continue very well into this year and maybe into next year. The best we can hope for now is for these kinds of diplomatic interventions to create maybe a ceasefire, a humanitarian corridor, assisting people to exit from conflict zones. But I dare say that the threat perception of the Europeans and the Americans are such that they will pour more weapons into Ukraine in an attempt to neutralize Russia. Because let me also say, maybe more controversially, that NATO is trying to neutralize Russia at the moment because the real challenge for them in their mind, in their thinking, is China in coming years. China is the rising giant in the East, and the Americans is sort of a declining hegemon of the West, and that is where the threat for them lies.
I see. So Anthony, I want us to, weigh both sides. In the event that BRICS, wherever the next meeting or whatever it is takes place, decides not to give up Russia in any way, whether by expelling them, whether by, being behind the Western I see you shaking your head already. But I want to know what will the implications be, whatever decision that BRICS takes?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a challenging question again, but I don't see BRICS expelling any of the founding members. Russia is a founding member. In fact, the Russians invited the South Africans to join BRIC, and then it became BRICS. And Russia plays a very important role historically in anti-imperialist, and anti-colonial wars against European and American hegemony or dominance. It has that standing amongst members of the global South. Many countries in Africa and elsewhere in the developing world has a lot of respect for the role that Russia played and continues to play. And I think, many members of BRICS and the enlarged BRICS are proud of the Russians because it dares challenge Western hegemony and their so-called rules-based international global order. For those reasons, Russia will not be left alone and will be assisted by members of the global South. Of course, not militarily necessarily. Let me hasten to add this. I think the consensus in BRICS is that peace is preferable to war. And whatever BRICS does on its agenda in coming weeks and months, it must push the Russians, the Chinese can play a big role in this to find a peace table with the Europeans and the Americans. This is so important that, if BRICS fails to do this, then we really look at a evolution of warfare that might include, tactical nuclear weapons. And that is the last thing that the international community wants.
I see. Well, I don't know the right adjective to use for that scenario, but it does bring to mind one of the questions that I asked Professor Suklal about its members and bringing on new members who are already entangled in global organizations that BRICS is hoping to reform and perhaps even topple over. And so it leaves the question, should, membership of BRICS be determined by your interest of whether or not you want to be against the current order or be for the BRICS order? Yeah.
Look, I can only speculate to what the entry requirements will be for members to join, for outsiders to join the club of BRICS. But it's clear to me from my analysis that self-interest will guide the choice that countries make. There's a reason that Saudi Arabia or Iran or Nigeria or Egypt would want to join the BRICS alliance. They see their interests being protected and enhanced in the BRICS environment. That's the first thing. The second thing is BRICS will work for its members if it can pursue better trading relations globally, peace and security globally, and then enhancing the position of Africans in particular in terms of development, economics, and trade. And those, I think, are the criteria that will determine who joins BRICS and for what reason.
We'll hope so. Thank you so much, Anthony, for your time on the program today.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Absolutely, you too. Anthony van Nieuwkerk is lecturer at the Thabo in Mbeki. Well, he's a lecturer at Unisa, Thabo Mbeki Public and International Relations College there at Unisa. But that'll be all for our show today. Thank you so much for your company. I hope that you learned a thing or two from the discussions today. Remember that if you missed this, there's always a playback on our YouTube channel. Just search New Central TV. I'll see you same time tomorrow here on The Square. Make sure you're in the gathering. Bye-bye.